One of the little things that was shared was out in Ohio is that one person told about a kindergarten, first grade teacher that was teaching her kids about show and tell. Now, I connect that because in the Gospel of John, we're trying to use that as a theme, show and tell. Jesus showed who he was by his signs. He told who he was by his claims. And so this teacher was trying to teach the kids about show and tell and bring something. This time she said, I'd like you to bring something from your faith background, from your faith tradition. Whatever it is you grew up with, bring something for show and tell for that. And one little Jewish boy stood up and she said, well, I'm a Jew. And he says, this is the Star of David. And a little girl stood up and she said, well, I'm a Catholic and this is a rosary. And then a little boy from the Christian church stood up and said, I'm from the Christian church and this is a casserole. Anyway, so don't forget to sign up for the ice cream next week. How much do you think about your toes? How much do you think about your toes? What about it? Those 5 digits, at the end of your feet, they are important for balance and weight distribution and propulsion to run and to walk. Each of your toes has 3 bones except the big one, and it has just 2. But let's be honest, our toes are not the most attractive things on our physical bodies. I don't think I remember any pickup line that went like this. Hey, nice looking toes. Could be wrong. Maybe some of you tried that. No. Usually we say, whoa, her eyes sparkle, or her hair is gorgeous, or he has muscles in places where my former boyfriend didn't even have places. But rarely is it the toes. And without being too graphic, I want to be sensitive about this. Sometimes, as you well know, there can be odor associated with our toes and our feet. One day I was studying away there at my office at Highlands Ranch, Colorado, and I was the only minister on staff that happened to be in the building at the time. And the support staff came in and said, there's a homeless man out here. He wanted to talk to a pastor. I said, well, time to come in. And so we chatted. He found him to be very articulate, quite intelligent, actually. And I don't mean to be unkind or insensitive, but boy, the foot odor, wow. He was strong. And I've been in hospital visits and nursing homes and stuff through my years, and I've smelled some pretty good smells, But this was really strong, and he was aware of it as we talked. And he finally said, I know my toes stink. I know my feet stink. And I said, well, how can the church come alongside of you? And before the conversation was over, we had purchased socks and shoes for him. But of course, what he needed was a good scrubbing that he didn't have access to. Here's what I find interesting. That in our text today, in the study of the Gospel of John, those parts of us, as Paul would say, are unpresentable. Jesus chose to go there. Jesus chose the hard way. Jesus chose to go to feet. In fact, I have read this. I would like to get a little bit more first century documentation for this. But I have read that the one job a doulos, a slave, a servant in the ancient world could refuse to do was washing feet. Again, I'd like to get more substantial evidence of that, but I've read it several times from commentaries and such like. If that's true, that a slave could refuse this job because it was so lowly, so unpleasant, I am taken by this in our text today. Jesus lovingly signed up. He volunteered. He went. This today, John 13, 1-20, where we find ourselves in our study of the Gospel of John. I mean, this is a pretty famous story. And I think I'd summarize it for you this way with this sentence. True love shows up in the lowest of places. True love shows up in the lowest of places. And what's fascinating to me is it does so in his final hours. We're in the middle of the book, but we're in the last hours of his earthly life. And the theme is just love all over the place. In fact, can I just show you a chart about love from the Gospel of John? C.S. Lewis talks about the four loves. And you know these words. You've heard these words if you've been around church at all. There's this word that's very famous for us in the New Testament, agape love. There is philia love, like Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. There is storge and there is eros. Now, storge and eros, two other words for love, do not appear in the New Testament. But the verbs and the nouns for the other two words do. Can I show you a love chart just to show you where this is coming from? Here's a love chart from the Gospel of John. Take the verb, agape. The verb would be agapao, agapao. By the way, the very first reference to it is a rather famous one. You know it, and you're going to say it with me right now. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. I knew you knew the King James Version. So in the Gospel of John, 143 times in the New Testament, agapao. In the Gospel of John, 37 times. Now look at this. 7 times the verb appears in the first 12 chapters. 30 times in chapters 13 through 21. 30 times. What about the noun? What about the noun? Agape, that's the one we all know. And it appears 116 times in the New Testament. 7 of those are in John. The noun, not as much. The noun, not as much. The noun, what do you think that means? Just like faith. Faith is not just merely intellectually ascending to something. Faith in the Gospel of John, belief in the Gospel of John, trust in the Gospel of John is something you do. Same with love. It's not just something you talk about. It's not just a noun. It's a verb. More. 7 times in John. One time, agape in the first 12 chapters. That surprise you? 6 times in chapters 13 to 21. Now, there's this other word. Sometimes it is a synonym. We'll have to talk about this when we get to John 21, when Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he says, I love you, but he uses different words. So we'll have to chat about that then. But the other word, phileo. By the way, the noun never appears in John. Philia. But the noun, the verb, 25 times in the New Testament, 13 times in John. Over half the references to the verb love, phileo, is in John. And then it says 4 times in chapters 1 to 12, 9 times in chapters 13 to 21. What does all that say? What does all that linguistic analysis say? It says this: the closer and closer you get to Calvary, the more and more the theme is love. Love. And we certainly see it here. And we see it in 2 parts. It's very easy to just take your preacher's knife and just kind of slice down through this into 2 sections. First is the foot washing itself, and then there's the major lesson that comes from the foot washing. There's several lessons, but the major one we'll talk about when we get there. So if you have your Bibles or devices, look with me at John 13, beginning in verse 1. We'll read down through verse 11 and just see what's here for. What about this incident of Jesus washing? What about loving people down to their toes? Well, the text says, now before the feast of the Passover, okay, that's enough. Let's talk about that for just a second. So people and scholars especially get all excited about how do we make Matthew, Mark, and Luke sing with the Gospel of John. John seems to give a chronology. It doesn't seem to match. We know in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus eats a Passover meal with his disciples. But as we mentioned before, John, it's not so much he eats the Passover, he is the Passover. And so there's no Passover meal. There's no institution of the Lord's Supper on the occasion of the Last Supper in John. You got this stuff. You got the washing of the feet. How does this connect? And some scholars, because it says before, would say, oh, this must have happened like Tuesday or Wednesday or not Thursday night, the 14th day of Nisan, when the Passover lamb was killed. Well, we'll let the scholars just have their day. But actually, where did it say? Before day 1 or before day 2 or before day 3 of the Feast of Passover. It doesn't say that. It just says before. Before the Feast of the Passover was technically so. So I'm thinking that the best way to look at this is just to harmonize it and say somewhere earlier in the evening, Jesus washed their feet. And a little later he said, after blessing the bread, here, all of you, take, eat, this is my body. I don't think these have to go in conflict. So before the Passover, Feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew, that will not be the only time in this text it will say Jesus knew. Jesus just, knows stuff. He knew that his hour, we've been watching this from chapter 2, his hour not yet come, his hour not yet, but last Sunday, the hour has come, now is the judgment, now is the ruler of this world cast out. Same word in Revelation. His hour had come to depart out of this world. He was going to leave. To the Father, having loved his own. I hope every one of you here today are his own. But the phrase his own is used in a few different ways in the Bible. Sometimes it means the Jewish people. He came to his own, and his own received him not. Sometimes it refers to his family, like as in Mary and Joseph and James and Jude and Joseph and Simeon, his brothers and his sisters. But sometimes it refers to just the 12. And we know they're here, so I'm thinking that having loved his own, it says, who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, I have to comment on this because as Mike portrayed to us on the screen this morning, Marshall often uses the NIV 1984, which is a good translation. They shoot at dynamic equivalence, reflecting thought for thought, and it's good. But the 1984 NIV translation said, he showed them the full extent of his love. Well, I have no doubt that he did that. It's just that's not what the Bible says. The full extent of his love, my friends, is shown on Calvary's Hill. That's the full extent of his love. And this doesn't say that. That's why, and this is kind of interesting just for people that do what I do, but it says, what's the difference between the full extent of his love and love them to the end? Well, here's the difference. The Greek word telos means the end, the goal, the accomplishment, the complete thing, the mature thing. And the reason I'm making a big deal out of that is because when NIV did their 2011 translation, they put it back to this. Because they know that, no, the full extent of his love is Calvary. But washing feet is loving them to the end of his ministry. Loving these guys to the end, to the completed goal. So he loved them to the end. That's a good translation. And during the supper, when the devil had already put into the heart, can he do that? Does he have the power to do that? Has he put some things in your heart before? He'd already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing, there it is again, that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God, which would mean what, friends? He's eternally coexistent with God. And was going back to God. Now watch this. If we have this right, that this is Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Passover supper as well, you know what Luke tells us? They were arguing among themselves as to who was the greatest. And all of a sudden, they feel the trickle of water on their feet. I don't think they even noticed he got up from the table. He rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. William Barclay says, so often we are standing on our dignity when we should be kneeling at the feet of our brethren. He came to Simon Peter. Oh boy. Now you must understand that this is a U-shape. This is not Leonardo da Vinci. This is a U-shaped table. They're reclining. That means that Judas Iscariot is here reclining. Here is Jesus, and here is John. And Peter, I think, is on the other side. Because when Jesus says, one of you will betray me, I think Peter says, psst, John. Ask him who he's talking about. So John, reclining at the breast of Jesus, could simply turn, because three people shared a common dish. Who is it, Lord? Is it I? Where does that put Jesus' head? Right in the chest of Judas Iscariot. Judas, you sit by me tonight. Whew. So Jesus starts, I think he goes to the other side of the table, and he's working, and who's at the other side of the table? The head of the apostles, Peter. And we read what? He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered, what I'm doing you won't understand now, but after you'll understand. And Peter said, well, do you think he's going to agree with this? You shall never wash my feet forever. That's what the Greek Bible says. It's emphatic. And Jesus answered, if I don't wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter's like some of us in the crowd, a little impetuous. And he swings the pendulum clear to the other side. You're not going to wash my feet. If I don't wash your feet, you're not with me. Okay, give me a bath. Simon Peter said, Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said, Peter, punk and eater, the one who's bathed does not need to wash. Notice that, wash. Does John elevate the conversation again? Except for his feet, and he's completely katharos. Recognize an English word in that? Clean. And you aren't clean? Well, not every one of you is clean. For he knew who was to betray him, and that's why he said, not all of you are katharos, clean. Well, what in the world is in this first section? This is the actual foot washing. It's a stunning moment. It is for me. The God of the universe, in flesh in Jesus Christ, stooping low and washing dirty Palestinian feet. I don't know about you, but that's incredible to me. Now, we could look at other places in the Bible and see, well, what about washing feet in other places? Well, in Genesis 18, the first reference to washing feet, Abraham has 3 visitors from heaven. I don't know if their feet would be dirty, being in heaven and all. But he provides water for them to wash their feet. And in the next chapter, Lot, Abraham's nephew, provides water for those same 3 to wash their feet. In Genesis 24, verse 32, Abraham has a servant, and he sends him up north to Laban's house to fetch a wife for his son Isaac. And he finds Rebekah. Probably said, hey, nice toes. So water is provided. Chapter 43, verse 24 of Genesis, unbeknownst to the brothers, this is Joseph who's talking to his brothers, and says, we have provided water for you to wash. Judges 19:21, an unnamed prophet is given the privilege of washing his feet. 1 Samuel 25:41, talk about courtship. Abigail keeps David and his men from murdering a bunch of guys by washing his feet and the feet of his soldiers. And then there's that strange passage in 2 Samuel 11 when King David says to Uriah the Hittite, go home, wash your feet. David intended him to do more than just wash his feet. But did you notice something interesting about all those passages about foot washing in the Bible? Water's provided, and you get to wash your own feet. Jesus washed the feet. Jesus volunteers. In fact, if they're arguing about the greatest, get this. I just want to ask the question, why would Jesus do this? Well, one thing, we'd have to talk about whose feet are there. If Judas's feet are at the table and Peter's feet are at the table, that's a deceptive group. I mean, you've got Judas who will betray him. You've got Peter who will deny him. And I'm sure you'd want to wash the feet of somebody who's going to stab you in the back and somebody who's going to deny you. But those are the feet that Jesus washes. And not only that, but you understand that this is partly about hygiene, I reckon. They didn't have socks. They had just sandals. You were on more pavement today than they would have ever dreamed about being on a Roman stone road. Dirty. And it's not just about hygiene. I suppose you could say about hospitality. This is what you do in the ancient world by you offering yourself to somebody. But I want you to notice this. For John, there's something deeper. It's not just hygiene. It's not just hospitality. He talks about washing and being clean, being cleansed. That verb for washing is mentioned 4 times in the New Testament. Okay? 3 of those are in John, and they're right here. Oh, I shouldn't say that. 27 times actually in the New Testament, but 4 of them are in John, and 3 are right here. Clean, 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 clean. William Barclay said, just at the moment when he might have had supreme pride, he had supreme humility. Barclay goes on in that same section to talk about Francis of Assisi, who was an aristocrat, wealthy, looked down his nose at people who were in need, but his life was empty. His heart was shrunken. His conscience was numb. Nobody can really explain it, but one day, St. Francis of Assisi saw a leper, and some kind of switch flipped, some kind of heart did somersaults, and he dismounted, and he ran over, and he embraced that leper, and his life changed. The foot washing. Do you need a better example of the love of God other than the cross than that? No, those are lessons, hygiene, hospitality, cleansing, but that's not even the main lesson that we learn. Beginning at verse 12, we have the second part of this. And that's the lesson from this. What's the lesson from this? What's the main thing? Look at verse 12. And when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, I bet you could have heard a pin drop. They're probably all looking around like, what do you think it means? Shut up. I don't know. He said, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me didaskalos and kurios. You call me teacher and Lord. And you're right, for so I am. Do you recognize that language? If I then notice how he inverts them? Kurios and teacher. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. So, how you doing on that? For I have given you an example, and that word example means a pattern over which you could trace your life. That you should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly. Oh, buckle up. You know whenever he says that. And he'll say it twice in this text. A lesson's coming. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant, a doulos, is not greater than his master, a kurios, nor is a messenger, apostolos, like apostle, greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, congratulations. Blessed are you if you do them. I'm not speaking of all of you. I know whom I've chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. Psalm 41:9. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. You see why he says that? Because 3 people shared a common dish, and if John is over here and says, who is it, Lord? Then the Lord's able to say, well, it's he who dips with me in the dish. What you do quickly. He washed that guy's feet. He washed the feet of the guy who's going to turn him in. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one who I send receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. By the way, that's a pretty good word for you. If they receive you, they're receiving Jesus. You talk about self-esteem. Wow. Yeah, the main lesson here is not hygiene or not hospitality, not even cleansing, as important as that is. No, the main lesson is seek out the low places. Seek out the low places, friend, and get her done. Brother Butler wrestled with this in his commentary, and we have too in our little tribe of Christians. What do we do with this thing called apostolic example? At what point does the example become a precedent for us to follow and obey? But Brother Butler said, we got to be careful that we don't just repeat the symbol or practice the reality. Repeat the symbol. So if I wash feet, I'm good. Actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. If the disciples understood Jesus to say, do this, follow my example, and that was literally the case, why don't we see examples of this in the book of Acts? Because we see how many? 0. 0. And the only other reference to foot washing in the entire New Testament is 1 Timothy 5:10, when Paul says to Timothy for the church in Ephesus, if you've got a widow and she's on the list and she needs help, make sure that she qualifies. And one of the qualifications is, has she washed the feet of saints? That's it. That's the only other passage. Which makes me think you can fulfill this command of Jesus and this example of Jesus in ways other than washing feet. People did do this. Augustine in the 4th century did this. Bernard of Clairvaux did this. Popes in the Roman Catholic Church did this. Emperors in Austria, Russia, kings of Spain, Portugal, Bavaria, Church of England, Moravia, and some of our friends in Anderson, Indiana. The Sandy Patties and the Larnell Harrises and the Bill Gaithers. They're from a branch of people that it is not uncommon for them to practice foot washing in the context of the Lord's Supper. Not wrong. Still remember flying into Lexington one time, and I was asked to preach on the Lord's Supper to a unity meeting between the Christian Church guys and the Church of God Anderson, Indiana guys. And when I got done, one of their fellows came up to me and said, thank you for your message. Next time, I don't get invited back everywhere, so that's just kind of nice. Next time, will you talk to us about the Christian Church view of foot washing? I didn't know I was supposed to talk about that at all. So, there's a lot of ways to fulfill this, I guess. But maybe it would be helping somebody with a flat tire. Maybe it would be showing up to take down VBS decorations like the, 1,000 people we had here yesterday. I don't know exactly how you're going to fulfill this. I just know this. True love shows up in the lowest of places. So it's been some years ago now, but a certain president of a Bible college close by the name of Matt Proctor, preached his own installation sermon at the time of convocation when he was going to be made the 5th president of Ozark Christian College. And at the end of his message, he called a kid out of the crowd to come up on stage. And I thought, I recognize that kid, but he was a freshman, and I didn't teach any freshmen. He was just coming to school. It's August. Where do I know this kid from? I know this kid. Well, I had been at New Testament Christian Church a number of times to preach at Matt Proctor's home congregation in Iowa, Keokuk, Iowa. And I thought, I remember this kid, but I don't know who he is. Well, he was from that church, freshman, coming right in at the beginning. And Matt had him come up. And while Matt was concluding his sermon, did you hear what I said? He was still talking. And he had the boy sit down and he washed his feet. I can't chew gum and walk. But he washed his feet while he's finishing his sermon. And then he stood to his feet and he said, my dream for this school is that the graduates of this school have a towel and a basin in one hand and a Bible in the other. And I want that to be true of Park Plaza. I want us to hold the authority of God's Word that the kids learned about for the last 5 days at this church. We're not fudging on that. But I also want us to be servant-oriented and seek out the low places and use our brain about how to best help